I put this together um, for the Hampton Roads ASHI chapter, just to kind of say, talk about some 261 deck inspections I had done, and really all I'm doing is sharing a lot of the photos of the job and what I had found, and then go over some of the things that precipitated it. I could also go into marketing ideas and things that home inspectors could do to have add-ons. Um, as Hollis said, I don't do home inspections. I'm the further investigate, and that happened many years ago. I started out uh, figuring I was going to do home inspections, but then I just wound up getting a lot of referrals and jobs and working as a consultant, and you know didn't go into it, although I'd done a number of ride-alongs and participated in a lot. And I'm a firm believer in home inspection education. I think that being a home inspector or learning it is useful in so many professions, and it can be industrial hygiene, facade inspections. I can just tell you so many things. Ultrasonic testing of pipes that I've done, ASTM testing of windows and sealants. So now let's kind of move on to this. So um, I'm going to go over some of the things I found, and we'll see how far I get. Unfortunately, I don't have a clock up on this, so I'll just kind of, um, I don't really see that on this screen sharing, my timer.
I'll give you
So,
50, I'll give you a 10-minute warning.
okay, that'll work. Um, Well, what we've got is a community, and I was doing inspections for maintenance inspections and a 10-year warranty on the exteriors. These are stucco and eaves and all different types. And just to give you an idea, they're the front balcony decks. They're all balcony decks with what I called them a soffit because that's what kind of everybody recognized, but really it's a vinyl ceiling, vinyl covered ceiling under these decks. They're the end of the units, the deck. Um, Here's the rear. Just gives you an idea of how many and the configuration. You know, um, there's a close up of a rear, so you see the spiral staircase on them, and then there's a walkway. Spiral staircase is from probably 1988. Here's another type of deck that was there, more the standard deck that you see. That was only on one building. There were like, I think five of them. So, a ladder we had put up. And this started out, we were doing the inspections and, we'd hop on the balcony, um, look at the doors, look at sealants. But in doing that, we noticed the railings were loose on a lot of these. And let's see if I can get this to go. Now we're moving that with one hand. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
That's kind of redundant. All right. Uh, we still here?
Yep. We're with you.
Okay. Was the video playing?
Yes. The
Okay.
video was shaking.
All right. So that was basically just pushing out with the hand off a ladder. So there was literally maybe 10 pounds of force. I actually have a force gauge because, you know, how much force when you stand straight up, how much force can you push on something? So another thing we noticed is you've got the staining um, under here, and it's pretty heavy right here, indication of water getting in. So there's a close-up view, um, algae growth. And then we pressed on it, some of the ceilings we'd press on, and water poured out, um, of these soffits. And there's a close up with the water droplets, not having to press hard. And there's the amount of water that we eventually got out of there. Um, this was uh, this was not unusual. Now, what I did is we weren't doing these inspections for decks. This is what we had just discovered. I went to the property manager and I said, they're asking me, why are things going? I said, well, it looks like your decks have some safety concerns and major problems with water intrusion. Um, you know, uh, what have you done about that? Or what do have you heard anything about this? And they had commented to me, oh yeah, we've gotten complaints or, work orders, but we don't know how many decks need work and we don't know the degree of problems that they have. So I showed, some pictures, especially like the videos of the water coming out. I said, there's some serious problems out here. I mean, I can obviously help you and identify it. He said, well, I'd be interested in that. Can you get a proposal together? So, you know, always looking for additional work, especially when I'm already been invited into a place to work. These are add-ons, with it. Um, so, I got a proposal, and then I'm kind of selling it a bit, going, that this is going to be take a long time or a lot of man hours because, we're going to have to open up the soffits, and that's a picture. Um, you know, we can't really inspect these as a home inspector. You have to take the soffit down to look inside and find out what's going on because everything was hidden. All we have is we know the railing is loose. Um, and, we were wondering, it's like, well, I wonder how long this is going to take down. Um, and I started to set up the job. So we gave them a bid and they decided to go through with it. Um, and I also asked them, I said, well, would you like me to rank them according to what I think are the most severely affected? And I was looking at it from really a home inspection standpoint of, what's a safety issue or where does it seem to look like it has a high certainty of structural damage or decay. And that's what, it uses criteria. So I set up a criteria, a spreadsheet, um, 261 decks, front and back. And we had probably about 12 criteria that we were going through on a tablet. And we worked in like Excel, which really bogged down the tablet, having that many cells um, in there. The point is, though, Um, that was an add-on. Now we were not doing per unit. It wasn't about inspecting unit 4, doing the deck and doing a full inspection. This was for the property association, and it was to give a sense of where the problems were and where the most severe problems were. And to me, severe problems would be water intrusion, um, rot, um, wet, loose railings, might be some that were not properly secured. And then we'd move down to more minor things that are still a safety concern, but not as much of a problem. So the difference here is, we brought a set of tools and got pretty proficient on zipping the soffit vinyl fairly quickly. I've done a lot of this on other investigations, so it's not, you know, that that hard. Uh, so that's us looking at a post attachment after we've taken the vinyl down so we could see inside, just to give you an idea, and you can see where the water staining was. And basically the post was leaking right through the deck. the attachments. I want to show you something else here because this was an inspection technique that we picked up on pretty quickly. And please excuse me if we just have too many slides to get through this. You know, for you, I mean, I can always come back at another time with this. What we discovered is we're thinking we had to take the entire soffit down. Um, and to really look at things. And then we discovered, well, if we shine, say a 900 or 1000 lumen flashlight, like a tactical light, up through the soffit, since it's white vinyl, we really illuminate the bays to look at things. And then we could take our phone, zoom in, and really get a lot of good details there. Right here, we could see, okay, all the hangers have fasteners. They look to be the right type. They're not corroded. This was on a wall, so it didn't need ledger board, support it. And that really wound up being a pretty good inspection technique that we could just put in, each bay and look at things. And the other thing we went to, as Hollis and I talked about, is, once you find like mushrooms growing in the inside this cavity here on a floor joist in the subfloor, or you find water pouring out, you really don't have to find a lot else of problems because the whole thing needs the entire soffit removed and all repairs. So we just gave a general list of you're going to have to repair when you don't have fasteners because we can't possibly see everything. There's a limitation that it's not possible to get every single fastener viewed. You have to take it down once you start finding problems, you know, and then repair everything. And even the engineering firm they hired basically gave up and said they couldn't do anything on it except with that technique. They would have to see the soffit down and write a scope of work for 261 decks. And they didn't want to do it. So there's an example of a hole. The deck actually had a hole, and that's daylight. Can you see my cursor here, Hollis?
Yes.
Okay. That's that was daylight shining. Okay. Where to go? That's daylight shining through there, and it's totally rotted. I'll show you what these decks had on top of them later. They actually did not know the type of. They put a membrane roof on here and then a coating, like a non-skid coating, but they had no idea as to what the coating was or what the roofing material. This was done about. This was probably done in 2013, 2014. So there's an example of more water intrusion coming in right here, at the deck, and it's primarily due to the post, and you'll see pictures of it. Um, another one, more water intrusion coming through the connectors and the fasteners for the post and at the membrane. Pulling the soffit off, and then here's a moisture reading around 36% in the wood. As I said, this was a general report. It still was about a couple of hundred pages. Um, if I don't know what it would have been if I treated each deck as itself, the owners. So one of the things that we would look for is evidence of water, like staining or water droplets. Then we know water's getting in. Under here, um, it's pretty obvious. Here's a piece of the soffit that we pulled down to look inside, and you've got the algae. You actually have algae growth up in here. It's so wet. Um, Interesting. The solid soffits that were not perforated, they switched, had more problems because it held the water, and you were creating a nice humid environment too up there. Because you've got a cavity space that gets 110 degrees in the summer, and there's no it's wet inside. And more example of what we found. when it was pulled down in the growth and staining. We wore hats though, because a lot of times it would pour on your head when you opened it up. Um, this is showing a close-up of there. Originally, they started off, they had an engineering drawing us some details on how to do these deck posts. And what they called for was a bolt, um, a square washer. The bolt would go through the railing post and then be in blocking. And I'm not exactly keen on this, and a couple of engineers I know didn't exactly think this was the best way or would meet standards for, 200-pound load. They used hurricane clips to attach the blocking, but it had an engineer stamp. So, I think that's because they couldn't get in there and work. And then these are some stairs, I think bolted to that. So here's an example of, what we've got is the deck is some type of sheet membrane. I couldn't really identify. It did not look like modified bitumen under here with a coating that had sand in it to make it rough and walkable. And then you have these doors on the deck as well as patio sliders. And you can see they ran the membrane up to the threshold, but of course, a lot of the doors had deteriorated sealant, rotted wood at the jambs, and then, were leaking into the decks as well. So here's a picture of one of the railings on the um, post. Um, this one was interesting because they put a plate here and then put some type of goop or sealant around it to try to stabilize it and stop it from leaking. And we just noted these anomalies. Now, if you look at this, we took the cover off here, and you can see the bolts here. And I'm going to go through a couple of slides here. Just pay attention to the base of this, where it's at the deck. Obviously, this is a difficult site to seal since it's so rough. Okay, let's go in close. Okay, obviously that is not well secured. And that small movement there, which even the wind would get, then opens you up to getting water in between, down in that fastener. So the bolts had a pathway straight through to the blocking down below, and a pathway for water to enter.
So Stanley, let me interrupt for just a second. What is this surface that we're looking at? This is the balcony floor.
It's a balcony floor.
And what is that material?
That's a good question. Nobody knows. So what you have here is a coating with some sort of aggregate, probably quartz or sand, silicone in it. So it looked to me like it was a coating with an aggregate that you spread on top of the membrane. And I'll show you some of the things about this membrane. It was like, um, you know, sheets of membrane, maybe 6 foot wide, um, or 3 foot. Didn't know the membrane, don't know the coating. Nobody knew out there. So this work was done without knowing what was used. And the challenge that they have there is, how do you fix what you don't know, the material? You know, um, people were going, oh, all you have to do is just cut out the bad area and, fix the membrane. But as a couple of contractors told me, is like, I don't know the membrane. I don't want to touch it. I don't know what I'm going to fix it with. Let's go, maybe we can go back a couple. There it is. So I had a close-up view right along here in one of those spots. You know, it looks different in many pictures depending on the sunlight. Now, you know, how um, uh, clean it was. So here's one of those walkways from the spiral stair. Um, Now, this is they do have an end hanger here. And that's we can look at the blocking under here, but you can kind of see, they have an angle iron here and then another angle iron, but it obviously is not up to today's standards. And I did use code for inspecting this as a I would just say best practice because everything was a different time frame out here. You couldn't go by code because some of this looked like it was built without code, even at the time it was built. So they're the new railings that they have installed at the walkway to the spiral stairs. And here's how they attach the railings. So go back. You see these are two by sixes. That's not structural framing. That's your deck board. So they put an angle, um, a steel angle in there, and then attach the railing to the steel angle with bolts. So that doesn't meet the requirements for structural railing. It's supposed to go into a structural member, not the deck boards. Although it was pretty sturdy, but still. And it all came down to when they were installing it, the contractor just really looked like they picked things off the shelf, at Home Depot or Lowe's. So here's the bottom of the stairs. Now more on the spiral staircase. Can you see the height of that first step? Um,
Uh,
uh, and then here's the height of another step. Uh, those steps, some of them were like, 14 inches and others were like 4 inches. And again, I pointed out what the safety concerns were, but I also, talked about in the, to the community, it's like, well, there's not much you can do. These were built, almost 40 years, almost 40 years ago. So, that's what they did. But you should be aware of it, and not even to mention the railing spacing. Um, so here's an example of how they, the original railings, 5 inches. Um, but people would tell me something like, "Well, I never have children visit. I don't have to worry with it." Um, I had somebody say, "I never go on the deck. I don't care if the railing isn't there." Whatever. They just didn't want to fix it. Here's the old railings. You know, um, that was the older railings. It's not the newer ones that they installed. That was from the spiral staircase. Um, and there's an example of a spiral staircase. And you look at it's connected to the rake board. Not. It was supposed to be connected to framing, but when they went ahead and installed the aluminum coil stock flashing here, they took out the bolt and never put it back. Um, it helped, but that was real common. So here you can kind of see that there's been some sealant here. Let's see what we've got. This is the railing. Now that's the entire membrane. There is no plywood left under there. That's why it's moving so much. Now the owners, since they might have to pay for the fix this, they were actually arguing about that it was not a problem. So it all depends on who pays for things. If they weren't paying for it, it would be a real problem. Um, I mean, I can't do anything about that. I'm just inspecting it. But you can see the amount of movement. The plywood had totally rotted under that. And essentially the membrane's intact, but we're just moving it up and down. We're moving the railing. And that's just this, that'll illustrate the simple tests I'm doing. Hardly any pressure. I'm on a ladder. Here we just kind of figured these decks actually had no bracing, these wood decks. They weren't, and they also were, some of them, they were not attached to the house with the ledger board. So
Well, they're freestanding decks, right? There's a beam up there close to the house.
yeah, they're totally
Uh,
freestanding. But we could basically the whole the whole deck could, come off because it had no lateral bracing. Had nothing on it to keep it from moving back and forth. And we didn't put much on it, um, much force. Everybody knows, the problem with that is if you get a large group of people and they start moving in a rhythmical manner, the deck can, sway back and forth just like, bridges that collapse in the walkway out in, I forget what Midwest place, a Hyatt. You know, it starts swaying and then it falls over. So here's one with spiral stairs. And as I said, we're not really doing it. It may look like a lot of effort, but when you actually put a force gauge, if you're standing straight up and you're, not really bracing yourself, you might be putting about 25 pounds of pressure, to get that movement. Not a lot. I measured it just to kind of know, but it didn't really matter, you know. So here's a membrane that deteriorated with the coating, and you can see the wood deck down, the plywood deck down below. And this is the condition of many of these, whatever they were, membranes, cracked. When we would find something like this and a couple of problem down below, it would just like, well, the whole thing needs to be repaired. You have to remove all the soffit. You have to go ahead and assess it fully because you may not see an area that's, really damaged. Um, this was also leaking into the walls down below this deck. Um, couldn't really determine that except by invasive, but I knew from probing, I would pick up water inside the wall below these decks. So here's an example of like splitting. So one side would be a membrane, then there'd be another side, and everyone knows like on a membrane roof, you lap the seams, 3 inches, EPDM, TPO, you all have a seam lap. These were just butted. So a lot of times the seams just shrunk, the membrane piece shrunk and the joint just opened up between the two pieces. As I said, I don't know what they were. Um, and that's the coating. Gives an idea of scale with the probe. I make my own probes. Um, um, This is an example where they put a membrane over the drip edge flashing, and where the seam and the flashing, you're getting the membrane splitting, and then it's also cracked here, so you've got a leak. Of course, it's at the edge of the deck. Here's another nice photo, um, just where you have lots of deterioration. This also illustrates this patio slider door. Um, so a lot of people had wood rot here at the jams or the threshold and the brick mold. And of course, once you have rot, you go ahead and allow the water to bypass your deck membrane. Uh, and this, they added a piece of flashing in here, um, there. Uh, so we noted things like that, and many people were complaining, about that. But it just gives an idea. So according to your question, I don't know what they used. Maybe they used some type of modified bitumen, but didn't look like it. It had no reinforcement in it, no fibers. Um, and it was butted, all butted together. And then this coating, which obscured everything.
Never seen that.
Yeah, no one has, except I've seen it, but um, I think the contractor just made it up. So we could see right the plywood deck in between, and this just gives you an idea of scale, you know, um, for it. And that shows you how soft it is. Now, generally, when we insert a probe, something like that, so it shows the scale, we're really only using a couple of fingers. Um, you know, a lot of times I'll take pictures showing like one finger, my pinky pressing the probe through, somebody's structural support. So they understand. Here's another thing that we found here. So, one of the things Hollis and I talked about is I there's all these problems that remain hidden from um, us as when we're doing a home inspection. I'm not, but when it's a home inspection, it's visual, non-invasive. You're not going to be pulling the soffit down to look inside, taking things apart, you know, to really look at it. But these little things have big consequences and lots of problems. And sometimes the only inference you're getting is that water staining, you know, under the soffit, under these balconies. So what they did here is they've got this nice roof running down to this balcony membrane, but they did not run the membrane under the roofing. They just stopped the roofing here and started the membrane here, um, leaving uh, basically a gap for water to run in. And this kind of illustrates it. They did caulk it, you know, put something in there, some magic um, putty. Another membrane. This one, they ran it up under the door. It's in pretty good shape. The problem is that some people put in pan flashings under their doors, but a lot of times these membranes were just run up, coated onto the door, onto the wall. Now here it's kind of hard to see, but going up under that threshold, I needed to change this photo around, rotate it. Sorry about this. That membrane is pulled away from the threshold there, and it's got a gap. Um, so what was happening is, water would blow, and then it would just go behind the membrane under the threshold. Because if you look, whoops, it's really not that high. It's like 2 inches to 3 inches. These things were pulling away. Water can easily go up under that in a driving rain. And that's the gap. So we would lay down and look under these thresholds as part of it. Here's an example where we would pull on the membrane, you know, and it showing the scratch hole, how it had separated from the threshold. Now here's somebody, they went ahead and put I don't think the pan actually went all the way under the door. They just kind of put a covering under it to protect it. But of course it's open here, right along the end. So that doesn't really do any good. Here's another example where it's just like it's just rolling off. Um, they're um, they're flashing under a door threshold, folding down. And this illustrates the what it looks like. That's why I said it almost has a modified bitumen look. But you know, the way it's attached, um, I couldn't really tell. Here's another thing. You notice how they've notched the rake flashing here, and the deck runs into it. Well, there's just wood there, just bare wood that they left. Here's one they did do a little end dam, to try to stop it. from going in. But that other one here, what we were finding is if you check the wall down below, the water was running into the wall down below this feature. This is like a case study on how to do everything wrong.
It sure is.
Um, you know, unfortunately, in my world, this is really common. Um, so here you look inside, they've got this flashing, it's buried. And of course, a piece of aluminum's going to expand and contract, so it saws into the membrane roof. Um, Same thing that nails do in EPDM membranes when they don't have the a fiber board or insulation board. But looking in here, a lot of times there's just a hole. This, though, they did have the end dam and it went up a little bit, but of course the membrane was breached here. All right, let's see. Now we have the gutter here and kind of illustrating the flashing drip edge. So then this was going, into the wall down below, right there. Now let's get in maybe some interesting hanger details. So how about this for a structural hanger for this built-up beam? You have a corner, Simpson corner bracket as your support for this joist.
Nope.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the gap? No larger than eighth of an inch on here. That's what we were just illustrating the gap. So as I said, we were opening these up. That's the only way that you could see this, at least as fasteners, But notice here, this is a corner bracket. So this is acting as a beam, supporting a joist or it's part of a header. And they've only done a corner bracket here and then a toenail. At
Wow.
least that's better than most. How about this configuration? A hurricane clip installed with the hanger. Um, it didn't, at least so it has nails. So they were missing some nails though on the hurricane clip. Now here's the older style of how these deck, the joist for the walkway to the spiral staircase. So in the pictures previously that we looked at with spiral staircases, when they ran the joist for the walkway from the deck to the spiral staircase, they had these steel supports that was bolted into a, header. But here, you notice this is severely corroded. And it's no longer, it's corroded to the point where it didn't have what I would consider enough steel left on it. Okay.
Stanley,
So
what was that hose coming out of the wall in that previous picture?
hose. Oh, that's your electrical service. That's the electrical service line. Yeah. That's what it looks like. I think that's what it is. Let me see. It doesn't look like a hose. I know there were electrical service coming in from up, from the meter down below. Here, this is a hanger. Now, you notice something that's wrong with this? It's at the you've got a standard joist hanger. It's at the end of what's supposed to be your beam. Okay. Um, where's the rest of it? Because you're only attaching it. What they did is they bent it, and then it's under this when you look up. So they folded it over to nail it into the side of this. Um,
And they
um,
left some
beam.
nails out too.
Huh? Oh
And they
yeah,
left
that
some
was the
nails out.
next thing I was going to say. Yeah, they left the fasteners out too. See here, here, and here. course, they couldn't do that because it would have gone through out the other end. And then they'd have a problem hitting the other metal. Um, just really improper use of connectors. Here, so they've got their corner bracket instead of a hanger, and it's only got fasteners on one side. Um, we we were finding all types of connector problems and improper fasteners and things like that.
Also, they countersunk the fasteners so that 2x6 is no longer a 2x, it's a 1x.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Can't do that. Here, they just wound up toenailing it, into it. Uh, uh, so, we pull down the soffit, and then you can see the water staining. It was wet. And notice something that's different here. You don't see a hanger. It just isn't there. Can you everybody catch that?
Yeah.
So
Here's another
Stanley, we're getting close to the end here. I guess I
Yeah.
find myself wondering at what point here do you stop writing up individual specific items on each deck and say, the multiple miscellaneous defects sufficient to require complete demolition and replacement?
No, here's what we did. We had a spreadsheet, and we categorized deficiencies, missing fasteners, incorrect fasteners, connector deficiencies, um, um, wet, water leakage, rot, um, railings loose, railings improperly secured. Um, and what we did is we would just put an X. We would have a spreadsheet, so each deck would get these so many X's. And then we had them ranked for, like, well, if you had certain categories like railings loose, rotted wood, that was going to be a priority to fix. If we saw only a few fasteners missing, then that would be lower on the scale to come in there and repair. It would still be a warning. But no, we didn't make it global. We went specific, but we didn't go in and say the fasteners were missing, the hanger is missing this location. And that's what people were looking for, but it was not bid that way. It would have taken a lot more time, to take the entire soffit down, go in there and point out each one, and then do essentially a scope of work and quantity takeoff. But we didn't generalize it. We would go in and had categories, and each deck would get categories checked.
Yeah, I think there is a middle ground that I like what Hollis said, but I would say numerous issues with this deck. For example, this, and this. The deck needs to be, evaluated by a qualified deck contractor and all repairs made. So I think there's a middle ground there.
Yeah. But I wasn't going to do that.
Okay.
It was a decision on my part to go ahead and have specific defects, at least checked, because that's what I wrote in the proposal. I'm going to check for these defects, and I'm going to notify you if I find them. It's limited visual. Um, but when I found literally, you're right. You could just skip it and go, look, everything needs to be worked on. The whole soffit needs to come down. You have major issues, but then they kind of want to know which decks should they address first. Well, what's your criteria for addressing a deck? Health and safety is one.
Right. Most important.
Structural. I mean, structural. If you have a hole in your deck, your subfloor of your deck, that's a pretty major structural issue. Somebody could you know, fall through, even if the railing was fine. So that was my decision on how to do it. And that way I could come in and also point to exact things. This deck had this, even if I didn't have exact um, an exact listing of the locations.
Okay.
Um,
I'm not criticizing you because we all do what we're comfortable with. I'm just saying that there's maybe a happy medium, but some things I'm just like you. I'm going to write down every little thing I find. But decks, you're checking for rot at the posts. You're looking for the ledger board. Is there
yeah.
flashing? Is it pulling away? The same thing. And I think it's easy enough to say there are significant problems with the deck. Here's one, here's one, here's one. There are probably more. Get a deck contractor out
Oh
there.
yeah. And that's pretty much what I did. But I
Oh,
was
okay.
picking a criteria. The next, probably the next thing to continue with this would be to show you maybe a table and how it was illustrated. This is just showing you some of the problems found by looking under a soffit. Essentially, that you may not even know existed.
Yeah.
You would have no way of knowing this hanger wasn't there unless
Exactly.
unless you
That
take a
was a
look.
great catch.
Huh?
I said that was a great catch, but not all of us pull the soffit down.
You wouldn't. This is not a home inspection.
Oh, what is it?
This is not a home inspection. That's what I said at the beginning. This is a specialty inspection
Ah,
written with
got it.
a proposal for inspecting. Were you going to go in and quantify? Would you go in as a home inspector and quantify what deck should be repaired first out of 260? Would you put that on the line?
260 decks?
261 decks.
Well, I don't do that shit.
Right, I do.
All
I'm
right, five
showing you what
minutes.
I found and
Five
how I
minutes,
did.
Stanley. 5 minutes, Stanley.
Okay. And this is not a home inspection. You know, I don't expect it to be. On the other hand, um, um, you know, the thing is, any home inspector could do this if they wanted to take on additional work or different work. You're right.
Well, I think that's an interesting part of this discussion because, on the one hand, Stanley, you're showing us a lot of examples of really lousy workmanship. And yes, the association or property management company, whoever it was who hired you, did the right thing in getting this stuff evaluated. It seems to me they're a little bit slow on the uptake and getting the decision made to get the stuff fixed. But that's between them and their
Yeah.
occupants, their owners. But the interesting piece of this is that what you've done here is taken home inspection skills and leveraged them in such a way that you're able to take on this other type of work that isn't a home inspection.
Now,
Right?
let me give you
I
an
think
idea
that's
of
I think
what,
that's
yeah,
if you could speak to that, I think that would be a good use
that's
of
what I
these next
wanted.
few
That's what I'm
minutes.
trying to say is there's a lot of things that are left on the table. Now, I'm not doing home inspections, but I already have a client. They're already relying on, they trust me. What other work can I do for this client? It doesn't have to be a home inspection. I mean, already we expand into sewer scopes, you expand into thermal, you expand into um, uh, radon, mold. So I just took this and expanded the deck inspection and made it invasive by taking a
So,
soffit down. And
so
then I
let me play
showed
the
you,
let me play the devil's advocate with you here for a minute.
yeah.
Um, would you be required to be a structural engineer to take on a job like this?
I don't think so because I wrote the
Because
proposal to inspect to the standards of, safe, health and safety, and already home inspectors are doing that.
and you're not designing the repairs,
No,
you're just saying, hey, it's broken or it's rotted or
no,
it's the nails are missing.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
identifying standard home inspection problems. If this wasn't covered with the soffit, would you leave that unnoted? If you saw it, you'd be commenting on it. If you had the
Yeah, well,
most
of
real
course,
ones,
yeah.
you'd comment on.
Let me add something. You
Yeah.
know, what Stanley's done here that is lacking in most presentations like what he's showing you. You think back, what he's doing is he showed you first all of the conditions, looking at the flashing, the membrane, where the water can get in, the staining down below, all of the symptoms that the home inspector is finding. Okay. The home inspector then, based on their findings, then they're going to recommend someone like Stanley comes in and does evasiveness to determine and try to figure out the impact or the degree of the concerns. And then Stanley's report like that, then it goes into, then you get the next one that is the debt contractor that has to tear everything out, and then he can give them the proposals on fixing the stuff. But Stanley's presentations go beyond a lot of these other guys that are doing this with EIFs and that. They show you all the horror stories about what they discovered. Stanley's plugged in, and he tends to do this, is plugged in what you can see of the problems before you're digging in to see the symptoms and then figure out how do you correct them. Okay.
Okay, so Stanley, we got 1 minute to go. Why don't you wrap it up here, and
Yeah.
we'll put the door prize here in a
Um,
moment.
that's you. Whoever summarized what I'm explaining did, is correct. Now, I got into this profession because a lot of home inspectors, especially Maryland, Mid-Atlantic region, referred me. They would find some of these issues and then go, well, call Stanley, to really further investigate. I'm saying, well, when things are slower now, you may want to take this on or hire me as a sub and, run it yourself and take on some of these things. Um, you know, with Obviously I had a crew here. We were doing these decks. We got down to like 5 to 7 minutes. We could pull the soffit down. We're looking up there. We're taking photographs. We're not, one person's doing the tablet. So, we're going through here, and we were lucky because it's like, well, this is so horrible. It's easy. It doesn't usually get that way. Um, that that can be good. I can wrap it up because it's time, isn't it?
It is time. Stanley, we sure appreciate your time.